You reply to a message, then reread it 3 times. You make a decision and immediately feel a small sense of discomfort. Not panic, not disaster, just this quiet feeling that something is off. Like no matter what you choose, some part of you still feels wrong. And after a while, you stop trusting your own decisions entirely, because somehow every path starts feeling slightly incorrect. 2. Problem deep dive. You can spend 20 minutes choosing a simple response, not because the decision is important, but because every option feels connected to who you are. If you say yes, what does that say about you? If you say no, what kind of person does that make you? And slowly, your brain stops treating choices like actions. It starts treating them like identity evidence. That's why even small things become emotionally heavy. What to wear, how to text back, when to speak, whether to post something online. You're not just making decisions anymore, you're managing the feeling of becoming the wrong version of yourself. And the strange part is, even after deciding, the discomfort doesn't disappear. You can make the logical choice and still feel uneasy afterward, because the problem was never only the decision, it was the relationship between the decision and your self-image. You start replaying moments constantly. You wonder if you sounded weird, too cold, too emotional, too quiet, too much. And eventually, your internal standards become so unstable that no outcome feels fully correct. Psychologists sometimes call this maladaptive self-monitoring. Your attention becomes overly focused on evaluating yourself in real time, noticing, correcting, comparing, reassessing. Your brain becomes less interested in living the moment and more interested in auditing it, which creates something exhausting, a life where nothing feels fully settled. Even good moments, even successful choices, even relationships that are going well. Because somewhere underneath all of it, there's still this question, what if I'm doing this wrong without realizing it? 3. Reframe. But this pattern usually doesn't come from vanity or weakness or lack of confidence. It often develops for a very human reason. Your brain learned that being correct kept you emotionally safe. Maybe approval mattered a lot growing up. Maybe mistakes felt emotionally expensive. Maybe you became highly observant because predicting reactions helped you avoid rejection. So your mind adapted. It became careful, flexible, hyper-aware. And at first, that awareness probably helped you. You learned how to read rooms, adjust quickly, avoid conflict, notice subtle emotional shifts. But over time, the same system that protected you started turning inward. Now, instead of scanning danger outside, your brain scans yourself. Constantly, looking for flaws, missteps, wrong tones, wrong decisions, wrong identities. So the issue isn't that your brain is broken, it's that it became too dependent on correction. And eventually, a mind that always searches for what's wrong will find something wrong in almost everything, even when nothing dangerous is actually happening. Which leads to a deeper question. If your internal standards keep changing, how could any choice ever feel fully right? 4. Psychological mechanism. Your brain works a little like a GPS system. Normally, a GPS helps you adjust direction when needed. But imagine a GPS that recalculates every 3 seconds, even when the road is completely fine. That's what chronic self-evaluation feels like psychologically. The brain has systems designed to detect errors. This is useful. It helps you learn socially, avoid danger, improve behavior. But when self-monitoring becomes excessive, the brain's error detection network becomes overactive, especially in people who rely heavily on external feedback for stability. So instead of using feelings as information, you start treating feelings as verdicts. A tiny discomfort becomes proof. A moment of uncertainty becomes identity evidence. And because emotions naturally fluctuate, your standards fluctuate too. One day you feel confident about a decision, the next day your emotional state changes, and suddenly the same decision feels wrong. Not because reality changed, but because your internal measuring system changed. This creates a mental model called the moving target. You keep trying to land perfectly, but the target never stays still long enough. Which is why reassurance rarely lasts. Even after people validate you, your brain recalculates again. Because the deeper problem isn't uncertainty, it's the belief that you must feel perfectly certain to trust yourself, and human beings almost never do, especially when identity is involved. 5. Practical framework. 1. Separate discomfort from danger. The first step is learning that discomfort is not reliable proof. Your nervous system often reacts to unfamiliarity as if it's risk. especially when you used to over-monitoring yourself. So instead of asking, does this feel perfectly right, try asking, is this actually harmful? That question matters because it shifts activity away from emotional prediction and toward rational evaluation. For example, you send an honest message to someone, then immediately cringe afterward. Instead of treating the cringe as proof you were wrong, you recognize it as emotional exposure, not danger, just visibility. And that changes everything slowly. 2. Stop auditing yourself mid-action. A lot of self-doubt comes from trying to observe yourself while living, which splits your attention. Psychologically, automatic behaviors work best when they stay automatic. Too much conscious monitoring interrupts natural flow. That's why conversations feel harder when you watch yourself too much, or why simple tasks become awkward when you overthink them. So practice finishing moments before evaluating them. Speak first, reflect later. Act first, analyze later. For example, during a conversation, instead of mentally grading every sentence, focus entirely on the other person's words. This reduces cognitive overload and allows more natural behavior to return. 3. Build stable internal anchors. People who constantly feel wrong often rely too heavily on changing emotional states for direction. So your brain needs something more stable: values, patterns, personal principles, not moods. Write down 3 things that matter to you regardless of emotional state. Maybe honesty, curiosity, kindness, depth. Then, when making decisions, judge choices against those anchors, not against temporary feelings. For example, you may feel anxious about disappointing someone, but if honesty is one of your anchors, you can still trust a truthful response, even while feeling uncomfortable. That creates internal consistency over time. 4. Allow incomplete certainty. Your brain keeps searching for the perfect decision partly because it believes certainty exists somewhere. But psychologically, most healthy decisions are made with partial uncertainty, not absolute clarity. People who trust themselves aren't people who never doubt. They're people who can move while doubting. That's an important difference. So next time you feel stuck, try saying, "This may not feel perfect later, and I can still survive that." Because confidence is not the absence of uncertainty, it's the ability to tolerate it without collapsing into self-erasure. 6. Integration. Maybe the real issue was never that you keep making wrong decisions. Maybe it's that your internal compass became tied to shifting emotional weather. And weather changes constantly. Some days you'll feel certain, some days doubtful, some days emotionally distant from yourself. But if you rebuild your life around chasing the feeling of completely right, you'll spend forever recalculating. The goal isn't perfect internal certainty, it's learning how to stay connected to yourself even when certainty moves. Like walking with a compass during fog. You won't always see clearly, but you can move honestly. 7. Quiet, empowering close. There's a quiet kind of exhaustion that comes from questioning yourself all day, from treating every choice like a hidden test, from believing your worth depends on getting your identity exactly right. But human beings were never meant to live with that level of self-surveillance. You are allowed to be uncertain sometimes, allowed to make imperfect choices, allowed to exist without constantly correcting yourself. And maybe healing begins the moment you stop asking, "Was this perfectly right?" and start asking, "Was this genuinely mine?" Because the people who trust themselves most are usually not the people who never feel wrong. They're the people who stopped abandoning themselves every time they did.